What's up, everybody? Ghost Girl 007 here, and today's video is going to be another episode of Haunted Reads. So with further ado, let's get into this spooky video. Ghost at Gettysburg. I'm going to read some more of this today. I'm going to read some of this until we're finished with it. Ghost at Gettysburg. July 1st, 1863. The Confederate is riding high on its victory over the Union at the Battle of Chancellorsville in Virginia. General Robert E. Lee has marched his 71,000 men into the North. Going on the offensive, the newly appointed Union General George Meade has decided to bring his 94,000 men to meet them. The two forces clash at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, for 3 days of battle at now the famous landmarks such as Little Round Top, Devil's Den, and Cemetery Ridge. In the end, the Union pushes back the Confederates, driving them to retreat to Virginia. This is a picture. I'm going to read this in the corner here. A view across just a small portion of the Gettysburg battlefields from Little Round Top to Devil's Den. So this, I'm pretty sure, is Little Round Top or Devil's Den. I think this is Round Top. The victory was a turning point in the Civil War, but it came at a staggering price. Nearly 8,000 soldiers were dead. 3,000 were mortally wounded. Nearly 30,000 more were injured. And yet 10,000 more were missing. How many of the dead still wander the battlefields and even the town? Some say that number is too great to count. And this is Pennsylvania Hall right here. You'll probably read a little more about that. Pennsylvania Hall, Gettysburg College, at the time known as Pennsylvania College, had been open more than 30 years when the great battle was fought on and around its campus. One of its 3 buildings at the time was Pennsylvania Hall. Stately and sprawling, the building was turned into a field hospital, used by both sides to try and treat the wounded. Its floors were soon slick with blood as surgeons amputated limbs and tried their best to dress bullet and bayonet wounds, all without anesthetics. So this is what you'd see inside the hospital. It says there, amputations by handsaw without anesthetics was common in Civil War field hospitals. So that's what we've seen right here. Don't know what I was about to say. The hall still stands today, having served over the years as a dormitory and not as an adamant travid building. Students and administrators alike have seen a single man, thought to be General Lee, pacing the campus late at night. Others have seen a pair of sentries looking out over the fields. The most famous story, however, was relayed by Mark Nesbitt, author of the Ghosts of Gettysburg book series. According to Nesbitt, two administrators working late one night went to take the elevator down to the first floor, which instead took them to the basement. When the doors slid open, they were horrified to see a scene straight from a Civil War hospital with wounded men writhing in agony and surgeons conducting amputations. One surgeon turned to them, beckoning them to come in and help. The woman frantically pressed the elevator button until eventually the doors closed and they were returned to the main floor. They immediately went to the campus security, but when the guards went to the basement to investigate, there was nothing there other than musty old storage boxes. So I'm gonna read this little half right here. Right, the exterior wall of the Farnworth House Inn is still pocketed with over 100 mine ball holes. Below, this photo was taken on a ghost hunt at the Farnworth House Inn. The face in the window could not have been caused by a reflection, and no investigators have been able to explain it as anything other than paranormal. Can't really see what they're talking about, I don't think, unless it's in the window. And it could be. And this is the form. This is what we're about to talk about next. The Farnworth House Inn, built in the early 1800s. The building that is now the Farnworth House Inn has changed hands many times. It started as a private home, became the property of the town bank, was run under the name Sleepy Hollow Inn, and is currently prospering under the stewardship of the Schultz family. During the Battle of Gettysburg, over 135 main balls and at the least one artillery shell struck the south side of the building, the latter of which remained lodged there until the current owners pulled it out, afraid it would one day fall on passersby. Confederate sharpshooters were posted in the attic, and historians have theorized that the shot that killed Mary Virginia Jean Wade, the one civilian casualty of the battle, was fired from that garret 3 stories down. The basement served as a hospital room with all the death and suffering that entails. This led to the Farnworth House Inn being counted among the most haunted places in Gettysburg, with as many as 16 spectral entities at the inn. People see and feel these spirits walking around, sometimes following the guests from room to room, and even sitting on their beds during the night. Heavy breathing and sobbing have been heard from unknown sources, and the smell of cigar smoke sometimes drifts through the air. The sound of a jaw harp being played in the attic is thought to be made by one of the sharpshooters who was stationed there and never left. His post, that room, is apparently padlocked shut because of the force of the restless spirit that occupies it. Conversely, the door to the basement has been known to open on its own, as a soldier appears carrying a wounded comrade down to what was the makeshift field hospital. An older woman in a period dress, thought to be a former matron of the house, has been mistaken as one of the staff before disappearing into the thin air. And the spirit of a midwife has been known to tuck guests into bed in one of the rooms. And this, I'm thinking, is one of the sharpshooters. Battlefield legends. Many people don't realize that at Gettysburg, the battlefields were everywhere. Dead and wounded languished on the roads in the stifling July heat. Citizens walked around with automatic herbs under their noses just to bear the smell. And today, some people still claim to get phantom whiffs of peppermint while walking through town. The battlefields of Gettysburg's National Military Park are preserved by the National Park Service, NPS. They are around the town, almost totally encompassing it. Many farmhouses and other buildings that were privately owned at the time of the Civil War are now owned by the NPS, and they have their stories to tell. Having been in the thick of the fighting, the George Wicket farmhouse, like many Gettysburg buildings, housed soldiers and served as a field hospital. Ghosts of Confederate soldiers are said to pace the attic where they hid from Union forces until they were discovered and killed. There is also a door on the second floor that will not stay closed even when nailed shut. The humbling house was near the front line and acted as a surgery place where many men lost their limbs and lives on the operating table. Amputated arms and legs are said to have been thrown out of the kitchen window to keep the operating area clear, and a grisly pile formed outside that window is said to now rattle and make strange sounds for no visible reason. The Humbleburg House is also where Confederate Brigadier General William Barksdale died, crying out for water, which he can be heard still doing today. The fields themselves have their share of spectacle legends. Military band music emanates from the cemetery ridge. The cries of soldiers and even their apparitions have been experienced all over the park. At the peach orchard in the west, at a site of Pickett's Charge in the north, and beyond Little Round Top, however, seems to be its own hotspot for haunts, as a headless horseman has been seen riding there, apparently trying to rally his long-lost men. Another popular story aroused during the filming of Gettysburg. Some of the many extras were watching the sunset from Little Top when a haggard man dressed in Union garb and smelling of sulfur approached them. He talked about the ferocity of the battle and passed them some ammunition. The extras thought he was one of them until the ammunition was reportedly authenticated as being 130 years old. This is a scene from the battlefield of Gettysburg. No place like home. In the wake of the Civil War, thousands of children were orphaned, in desperate need of homes and care. In 1866, the National Soldiers' Orphans' Homestead was opened in Gettysburg, and 200 children passed through its doors over the following decade. When Rosa Carmichael was brought on as the matron in the early 1870s, rumors of abuse began to circulate. She was arrested and fined, but allowed to return to her post, where her violence and torture of children only increased until she was run out of town in 1876. Children were kept in a basement dungeon, shackled to walls. One boy was penned outside in the bitter dead of winter until two men passing by heard his cries for help. An older boy was hired to administer corporal punishment, to the apparent delight of Carmichael. Until 2014, the building was home to the Soldiers' National Museum, and patrons reported hearing the cries of children, felt little hands tugging at their clothing, and experienced a malevolent presence throughout, thought to be Rosa returned. This is the little house. That's sad and messed up. I'm going to read this little corner right here. Hancock at Gettysburg shows the Confederate bombardment just before Pickett's charge. So this is another scene of the battlefield. Devil's Den. Lying to the west of Little Round Top is a ridge of boulders known as Devil's Den that saw brutal and intense fighting on the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg. Amidst these stones were towers as high as 20 feet. Soldiers engaged in vicious stand-up fighting. It was one of the few places where Confederates were able to drive off the Union. In doing so, nearly 500 men died. It's this stone area. That's the entrance to Devil's Den, I guess. President Lincoln's promotion. Yeah, I think that's what it says there. Ward Hill Lamon played many roles in Abraham Lincoln's life. He was a friend, a law partner, and at one point even a bodyguard. According to Lamon's writings, published after his own death, a few days before Lincoln was assassinated on April 14, 1865, the president told a small group of just 2 or 3 people, Lemon and Mr. Lincoln among them, about a strange dream he had. His soberness frightened his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, but he premised as his dream was haunting him, possessing him, like Banquo's ghost. In his dream, which had come to him about 10 days prior, he heard the sounds of people sobbing quietly. He left his bed and went downstairs where the crying persisted. But the mourners were invisible. He went from room to room, but could not find one. Where were all the people who were grieving as if their hearts would break? He wandered. Finally, he found himself in the east room, where he saw soldiers guarding a corpse wrapped in funeral vestments. Where were the mourners looking on the body, whose faces was covered? Lincoln asked. Who is dead in the White House? To which a soldier replied, the president. He was killed by an assassin. The crowd erupted in grief, startling Lincoln away. He then said to his wife, it's only a dream. Mary, let us say no more about it, and try to forget it. Lemon maintains that this was just one of several ominous premonitions that Lincoln was having. Though the president tried to sweep them aside, laugh them off, or rationalize them of this dream, Lincoln reportedly said, it was not me, but some other fellow that was killed. It seems that this ghostly assassin tried his hand on someone else. A short time was all it took to prove him wrong. However, as a few days later, John Wilkes Booth would shoot him from behind in a box at Ford's Theater. And there's this little box here with some writings. Mary E. Surratt, Louis Payne, David E. Herod, and George Atzerodt were hanged as conspirators in Lincoln's assassin. So these are people that were involved, said to be involved in the assassin of Abraham Lincoln. So now back to the other story. The body of a Confederate sharpshooter at Devil's Den. I'm not going to show that. It was one of the few places where Confederates were able to drive off the Union. In doing so, nearly 500 men died. And it is commonly cited as one of the most haunted spots in all of Gettysburg. Drums and gunshots are often heard there, and the apparition of a scoundrelly Confederate thought to be a Texan is often seen walking the boulders, telling people what you're looking for is over there, as he points to nearby Plum Run, where heavy fighting also took place. Some say they're taking a picture with him, thinking he was a reenactor, only to find a blank space in their photo where the soldier had stood. Whoever haunts the area seems to have an aversion to photography. Cameras of all types have been known to jam and malfunction on the boulders. Film crews had equipment shut down, and cameras are knocked from stand or out of people's hands. Photographs was new when the Civil War took place, and so it was the first time that pictures of the brutality and violence of war were captured and seen by the public. There is a story that photographer Alexander Gardner moved the body of a Confederate soldier to pose it for a shot. In this disrespect and desecration is thought to be the root of the camera troubles that persist at Devil's Den. I'm going to read some of this. So let's see what is there first, and we'll come back to it. See what it says about the picture. Haunted objects have been reported to move on their own and appear in rooms other than where they were left. Spectacle features paranormal objects. Sometimes spirits and paranormal activities attached to items instead of locations. In a way, a haunted object is even more terrifying than a haunted place, as it can move around, change owners, and end up in your possession without you having the faintest idea of what is coming your way. I guess this is probably a haunted object then, like a bed or something. So that will be it for the day, and for today. So if you like videos like this, then like and subscribe, and comment in the comments down below. Until next time, guys, stay up with the spooks.